Alright, so we're going to talk about another type of percentage problem, and this type is called it's a simple interest. This is something that would be used in the financial world, so things like loans, savings account, they might use simple interest. And interest is just a word that means basically it's money that gets added on to an original amount. So like in a savings account, you deposit, you put money in. Maybe you have a $100 check from your birthday. You're going to open a savings account. You take that money in, $100, and then what happens is you get interest. You get money added on to that. On a loan, it's the other way around, where you go to a bank and you say, I need to borrow this much money. They give you that money, but they're also going to make you pay extra because they're lending you that money. So interest is an amount of money that gets added on to a starting amount. And that starting amount we call a principal. You can see that here. And so that's just kind of a term that is used to mean our original amount. And then one other thing is we have an interest rate. We talked about tax rates before. Rates just mean like a percentage. So an interest rate is a percentage that is used to figure out exactly how much money is added on to my starting amount each year. And so we've talked about a starting amount, principal. We've talked about a change to that starting amount, which is our interest. And then we've talked about a percentage. So this sounds exactly like a percent change problem, which we've dealt with before. So we can really think of these simple interest problems, like I said, as percent change problems. And so now, except instead of using maybe the terms percent change and original amount and amount of change, we might see these terms. We might see interest rate, but know that that just means the same thing as percent change. And then we might see principal. We'll just know that that's the same thing as my original amount. And then interest is that amount of change. And this is helpful because we know these equations, or we could use a proportion as well. If you prefer a proportion, we could use that, where we know it's change over original amount. Okay. But we've looked at problems before where we just figured out, okay, let's identify all three of these things. One of them I'm not going to know, but if I know the change and I know the original amount, then I can look at which of these equations I'm going to use, or I can plug in those numbers in my proportion. Okay. So we're going to look at some examples here. So our first example is Elsie, a friend of ours, has an aunt who is going to borrow money. She borrows $400 with an interest rate of 1.5%. And so we want to know how much interest will she pay. Now remember, we said interest rate is like my percent change. So if I look at this problem here, that 1.5%, that is going to be my interest rate. And so we are going to use that as a decimal form in my percentage equations. And then what's the amount of change? Or what's the interest? Well, that's what we're trying to find out. Now remember that whatever we find for interest, that's for 1 year. So this question actually asks me how much will she pay after 4 years. So we just have to be aware that whatever we find here, that's just for 1 year. And then what is my original amount, or what's my principal? Well, I look, Elsie's aunt borrows $400, so that's the starting amount on the loan. And then what happens is that the bank charges Elsie's aunt a little bit of money each year for her to borrow that $400. And so that's what we're trying to find out. So we remember my equations, and I'm trying to find amount of change. So I should have put these on here, but amount of change, or my interest. So change is equal to my percentage multiplied by my starting amount. So multiplied by original. Okay, I'm using terminology like we talked about before. So I'm going to take 0.015 times 400, and this is telling me how much money is the change in money in 1 year. So let me pull up my calculator here. So 0.015 multiplied by 400. Alright, so I find that it's $6 each year. So is that the answer to my question? Well, my question wants to know what's the interest you'll pay for 4 years. So what do you think I'm going to do with that? Well, if this is how much it is for 1 year, I'm going to multiply that by 4 years to figure out the total amount she's going to pay. So 6 times 4, I know that she's going to pay $24 after 4 years. Now notice, we had a change, a percent change, or an interest rate. Percentage sign clued me into that. I was trying to find the amount of change, or my interest amount. And then I had an original amount. So again, this is, like I said, just like a percent change problem. Okay, so $24 is the amount of interest. Let's look at another problem here, and let's look at this one. We've got Aaron earned $15.75 in interest for his savings account. If the simple interest rate is 3%, what is the principal? Well, if we look, we've got some terminology here. Interest, remember, we said is the same thing as the amount of change. So we know that the money in his bank account is changing by $15.75. In this case, he's getting that much more money. Kind of a sweet deal. He has some amount of money sitting there, and he's going to get $15.75 just added on for letting the bank hold his money. Okay, we know a percent change, or we know our interest rate is 3%, which I should be consistent. I should write that as a decimal, so it's 0.03. And then I'm wanting to know, well, what's that principal, or what is that starting amount of money? Okay, so I look at my equation here to know my original amount. Let me just make sure I get this right. I know percentage is equal to change over original. So that means then that original, to find my original amount, I'm going to take the change divided by the percentage. Okay, so now I can plug in my numbers. Well, my change I found was $15.75, and the rate, the interest rate, was 3%, or 0.03. So let me pull up my calculator again. $15.75 divided by 0.03. This tells me then that he started with $525 in his bank account. So he put in $525. The bank let it sit there, and they paid him $15.75 after 1 year. Okay? But my starting amount in this case was $525. Again, just like a percent change problem like we've seen already. Alright, last problem then we're going to look at here. We've got Bella from Twilight fame. She earned $216 in interest after 4 years on a principal of $1,500. Okay, so let's fill in. Now, we know that the original or principal amount was $1,500. Okay. And this $216 is interest after 4 years. Well, let's figure out what is the interest in 1 year. So 1 year of interest is going to be, I will find that by taking 216 divided by 4. And that tells me how much I earn in 1 year. And again, the equation I'm going to use is based upon 1 year worth of interest. So let me pull up my calculator. Alright, we've got 216 divided by 4. $54. So that means in 1 year, she earns $54 worth of interest. Okay, so where does that go? Well, it's not a percentage, so that's my amount of change. That means that in 1 year, her amount of money in the bank changed by $54. And in this case, it went up by $54. Okay? If it was a loan, then that amount would still go up, but she would just have to pay that back. Alright, so I'm trying to find what is my percent change. What is my interest rate? And so interest rate or percent change is equal to my change or interest divided by my principal or my original amount. Okay, so I plug in my numbers. My change was $54. My original amount was $1,500. I use my calculator, and 54 divided by 1,500, whatever I get as an answer, that is my interest rate. So I know my interest rate, what was that again? 0.036. Well, writing that as a percentage, I would write that as 3.6, because remember, I just moved I multiply by 100. I moved the decimal twice to the right. Alright, so then that's a 3.6% interest rate. Now that's a pretty good interest rate for a savings account. Okay. Alright, but again, we saw that interest is just really another word for change. That's how much my money or what I owe the bank is changing by. A rate is always a percentage. So interest rate is like tax rate or percent change. And then we saw that original amount in this interest world that we're looking at, that's the same thing as the principal. Okay, and we look through these examples. Feel free to go back and watch any of these examples if you're unsure.